Well, it's been such a big day in politics with so much to reflect on. With us in the studio is the singer and SNP supporter Iona Fyfe and the political commentator and former head of communications for the Scottish Conservatives, Andy MacIver. And in Edinburgh studio is the lawyer and former Labour parliamentary candidate, Cat Headley. Thank you all for joining us this evening. So, big surprise for us all this morning, just about spat my porridge out, but you know, she's been First Minister for 8 years. To start with, Iona, what would you say her successes and strengths have been?
I mean, to begin with, a leader that knows when it's time to go is a leader that has decorum and integrity. All throughout my life, she has been a constant, and over the past few years, turbulent few years, she's seen off, 5 Prime Ministers. She's led the country and the government through times that we haven't ever had before, without Partygate, without PPE scandals. She's really been a steadfast leader, and I'm absolutely devastated.
Are you? You actually feel devastated?
Absolutely. That's the word that I would use. For me, it seems like, you know, she was synonymous with independence movement. And right now, I personally don't know where we're going to go from now. OK, and we'll come to that, and we're going to talk about the challenges she's faced as well. But Kat, how would you describe her strengths and her successes?
Well, I think that principally, I think that was reflecting a lot of the comments in your piece there was about her style of leadership, her model of being a woman in politics. And I think that that's hard to get away from. But what I would say is that it needs to be more than that, and it needs to be about achievements. And I think we'll come on to this, and I think that that is where there will be more division over her legacy. But I think that most people are united in admiring her as a formidable communicator, and in terms of bringing quite a new style of leadership to our politics, which I think will resonate for a very long time.
Andy, Alex Salmond commented on her communication skills as well. Has that been crucial for her?
Oh yeah, I mean, and he's right to do that, to highlight that. Her communication skills were very good, and I think, you know, we always talk about COVID and how she dealt with that and communicated her way through that, and that was very reassuring, particularly juxtaposed against Boris Johnson, who was obviously less reassuring in his style when he was doing the briefings on COVID. I think we need to remember, so she took over the day after the referendum, and actually a big success was turning that defeat into something that actually grew and became bigger, because it wasn't necessarily a fait accompli that was going to happen. So electorally, she's really done everything that you could possibly do except that final hurdle of winning independence, and that has been a huge strength. You know, to be honest, she's the most significant political figure, not just in Scotland, but in the UK for the last 10 or 15 years, and nobody really has been able to lay a glove on her. She's very assured, she's very calm, she's not really able to be tripped up. We've seen slight differences over the last few months, as we saw in some of the clips earlier on that. But largely, nobody has really been able to lay a glove on her. And her success has been down to all those things in combination.
Kat, a lot of politicians from other parties have been saying nice things about her today. Do you think that privately, you know, people within the Labour and Conservative parties are quite relieved that she's going?
I think that most people within those parties would have to admit that you know, whoever comes next is not going to have the skill set of Nicola Sturgeon, and that at least that probably needs to be relished. But I think that there's a genuine sense across the parties that actually, that even by her own admission, she's kind of had enough, and that actually. And that has been clear for quite some time. I mean, there are so many policy areas that the Scottish Government is going adrift, and that things are just not getting done. And it needs, I think, fresh leadership and new ideas. Whether or not actually any of those that are standing to replace her will really be able to offer that and really be able to turn things around, we will find out. But I think that you know, we should all be united in seeing that this is a new chapter for Scotland, and hopefully some of actually the issues that have been not getting sorted by Nicola Sturgeon will actually get sorted now.
Do you want to say something there, Iona?
I mean, on the successes, I mean, growing up in Scotland, I benefited from, you know, free bus travel for under 22s, free social care for anyone who needs it, tuition fees, prescriptions now, of which down in England it's around £9.35 for one item, and in Wales this is what we do too. That's a political choice that Scotland and Nicola Sturgeon had chosen to protect.
Okay, but we can't deny the fact that there have been challenges in recent months, and we've got some of the issues that she's faced coming up on the screen now. Issues like the trans row, the SNP independence strategy, for instance. And Iona, her approval ratings have flagged a bit. Do you accept that Nicola Sturgeon has had a bruising time?
Absolutely, and the approval ratings unfortunately have been within people within the party, and I do feel like the trans row that we're talking about is something that has absolutely divided the membership. Personally, I feel like many other countries have passed this exact same legislation, and that this is not something that really should be controversial. But it's perhaps been a hill that she's died on.
Andy, do you think that any of these issues, including the trans row, have contributed to her decision to stand down? She said it wasn't any of these recent issues, but what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, we can't know for sure because, as you say, she said today that they weren't. But I think what we do know is that the last 6 months have been very different from any other 6-month period in her leadership. It's not just the trans row. The de facto referendum has been very controversial inside the party. There's a lot of concern about if that strategy had been executed, then they lost it, then effectively that's it, it's all over. And there was a lot of concern about that as a strategy. So that was a problem. And the other policy issues which are building up, because, this is not just the fault of the SNP, this is the fault of all politicians in Scotland, but we are not talking about the things that really matter in Scotland because all we're really talking about is independence. So stuff is getting missed. The major problems in the education system and the health service that aren't really talked about because we're talking about independence. So it's not a massive surprise that issues are starting to build up because our collective eye, is really off the ball at this point. So I think it's probably quite difficult to disaggregate the two things because the pressure has been mounting and, in that sense, it gets worse when you've had a problem just behind you. Your opponents externally and to a degree internally, they smell blood and they think they can make more progress with the next problem because of what's happened before. And I think you've started to see that sort of thing mounting a little bit.
We've talked about the problems with the independence strategy. And Cat, what effect do you think her resignation is going to have on the independence movement?
Well, I think that very much depends on how bloody and how messy the contest to replace her becomes, and also then what the essential decisions are in relation to the forward strategy, if there is a decision. Because, I'm not entirely convinced that this special conference is really going to be able to occur in less than a month. I feel that probably will end up getting delayed to allow for perhaps some fresh thinking on that. But it's only been, it's been just over 12, well actually almost exactly 12 hours since she stood down. We are very early in this process in terms of what this all means for the independence movement, for the SNP, for the other parties and for the union generally, and for Scotland. So I think that there's going to be an awful lot happening, but if the divisions in the SNP recently are anything to go by, I think that I'm not expecting it to be a quiet or even wholly dignified affair.
Iona, are you worried about the independence strategy now that Nicola Sturgeon won't be at the helm?
We have to realise that identity politics is something that we need to separate from the independence movement. Back when I was 16, I had people in school saying, I'm not voting for independence because I don't like salmon. So we've never been able to really separate identity from the idea of independence. And that's something
that inevitable. The next leader will be linked.
Well, I should hope that there's a concerted effort to remove this. We now have a Green coalition government, and one party. It's not just a one-party horse that's for independence.
Andy, Nicola Sturgeon is the SNP's biggest star. This must dent the movement.
I think it's too early to tell. I think one thing we have to remember goes back to something that you asked Kat earlier on about the reaction from the Tories and Labour in particular, and they have been pretty chuffed with themselves today. But I think a lot of that is misplaced. I mean, they are absolutely miles ahead. The SNP are so far ahead of any other party. There's no real risk to, for example, them not winning the next election. It remains almost inevitable that they will be the largest party after the next election. So I think it's hard at this point to say that this is going to massively dent the hopes. There are people who can take over and be in the job next, who are perfectly capable of holding their own and doing well. I think the key problem with the independence issue at the moment is the strategy that is employed. The Supreme Court decision gave them a big problem because the last several elections have basically been the same election. It's been vote for us for Indy Ref 2. The Supreme Court decision means you can't fight that election anymore. It doesn't work anymore.
As Sam said.
Yeah, and you know, it may not always choose the same words as, or indeed the same tone as Alex Salmond, but fundamentally he's not wrong about that. You know, they have to make a decision about how they take this forward, and really they're starting from scratch now, which may be no bad thing.
So, no obvious successor. Let's have a look at the bookies' odds. That should be coming up on the screens at the moment. And Angus Robertson and Kate Forbes seem to be the ones in the front there. It made me laugh that Alex Cole-Hamilton, the Lib Dem leader's 14-1, and he tweeted he was surprised. It was a bit unexpected. But Kat, what do you reckon of the runners and riders?
You know, I think that it'll probably be Angus Robertson, and you know, I think that Kate Forbes is going to come under an awful lot of scrutiny in the next few days, and I'm not convinced that this particular SNP membership, in terms of its demographics and its progressive politics, is going to vote for Kate Forbes in the round.
Iona, who would you like to see as the next leader?
I personally think that Angus is the person for the job. He's incredibly astute. He has been in politics longer than I've been alive. He has been great.
That makes me feel old.
He's been brilliant in his role as Constitution and Culture Secretary, and that's my field, and I just think it's Angus.
In a sentence, Andy, who do you think?
Well, I think nobody has no issues. All of these candidates have got an internal issue of some sort to deal with, and I think that is the key problem. I do think Angus is right to be favourite at this point, but I think there's quite a lot of water still to flow under the bridge before that actually comes to fruition. OK,
we'll have to wait and see. Should be interesting to see who comes out on top. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us this evening.